Good morning, my name is Jocelyn and welcome to All We Make Is Good. Over the last few years, I have done as much research as I can into how to make hand-knotted rugs the way that they do in Iran, Morocco, and several Slavic countries. There's lots and lots of history in hand-knotted rugs, but I'm just going to be talking about the loom itself, which I designed for my space, and the trial and error process that I went through to warp the loom and get it set up to actually start hand knotting a rug. I would like this video to primarily just be a documentation for myself of all of the trial and error that I went through and the process of me getting to this point. But I would also like this to be in some way educational so that maybe other people can try to replicate this in their own homes and also start making hand-knotted rugs, because I think that it has a really beautiful and fascinating history, and I'm in love with ancient textile arts. I think they're really important to our experience as human beings, and I've been really excited by this project. So without further ado, I will jump into the process that I went through to get to this point, which of course started with the pattern design. I wanted to originally make a crochet tapestry. This is what I designed for it. It is the first card in a tarot deck called the Fool. I chose a fawn because I think it perfectly represents innocence and new life. So I wanted something very simple. I drew this in Autodesk Sketchbook. It is a free digital drawing app for Windows. I have a Surface Pro 7 that I use to draw on. So I use that as a free application. I then transferred the image over to Stitchly, which is a paid application. I use it on my iPhone. I did pay a good amount of money for it, but it is a one-time fee. It is not a subscription, so I will never have to pay another cent for it. And it has a ton of really great features. I was able to make this pattern. This app is specifically meant for cross stitch, but it does have so many functions and so many capabilities that I used it to design the grid for originally the crochet tapestry, but now for the hand knotted rug. So it will give you a nice big grid. And because this project in particular was so big, it did break it up into 6 different patterns, which I had to reassemble so that I had all of the grids for just the bottom section and all the way up to the top. So this pattern itself is 496 by 824. So I believe when I was looking at the pattern itself, if I had done it on 10 count Aida cloth as a cross stitch pattern, it would have been approximately 4 feet by 7 feet. So this is obviously much bigger than that. But that was the original pattern that I created on the Stitchly app. Going from there, I designed the loom itself. And when you're doing hand knotted rugs, there are 2 different types of looms. There's the vertical one, which is what I built, and there's the horizontal one. The horizontal one is much worse for your back, and I already have back problems, so I wanted to give myself as much comfort as I could possibly manage while making this project, because I knew it would take me a significant amount of time. So my original loom design is this here, and I took bits and pieces of looms that I had seen in the videos that I had watched. So I wanted this to be, let me see, I wanted it to be created so that the height from the top of the top roller to the bottom of the bottom roller was 7 feet. And I figured that was perfect so that eventually I could figure out how to warp it so that I could shift the entire rug and I could get something that could potentially be almost 14 feet long on the same loom. Of course, I didn't build this one. This one was meant to be wood, but I will continue going through. So I wanted a frame that had this bar fixed on the bottom and then this bar on the top so that I could warp up and down. This dowel going across the middle is something that they use to, and of course I don't have any sort of weaving background, so I'm sorry if I'm using the incorrect terminology when I explain this. But the dowel is used to pull forward the backwards warps of the shed so that it opens the shed in a different way to pass the yarn through, pass the weft through. I hope that was okay. So anyways, I have different hooks so that I could place that dowel at different levels. There are holes here in this frame where I could put pegs through so that I could adjust this top bar so that I could adjust how tall I wanted the rug to be after it was warped. So of course I have had this, I drew this on March 8th of 2025. So I've had this plan in place for over a year, but with little to no woodworking skills or tools of my own, I was relying on the help of family friends or family members, and it just never worked out that we had the time to get together and do this kind of a project. So instead, after I designed the fawn pattern, I started it as a crochet tapestry, didn't like the way that the yarn was working out. So I converted that loom into this, which is what you see behind me, a PVC pipe build. So this is entirely made out of 1-inch pipe. Originally I wanted it to be 8 feet tall. I did have to modify that while I was building it because my ceilings will not allow for a loom that tall. I wanted it to be 6 feet wide. Again, this was modified to fit my space after I got home with all of the pipe, and I wanted it to be 1 foot deep. So I really wanted kind of like, I wanted like a 3-side frame, and then it would just have the adjustable poles on the front so that that was where I was warping and working, which is exactly what I have right now. The differences are that I did not use 2-inch pole here in the middle. On the adjustable bars, I stuck with 1-inch pole, pipe, excuse me. And then the other thing is the T-bars. And I'll just put an extra clip in here. The T-bars that I used are 1 1/4 inches so that they could slide over a 1-inch pipe without getting stuck. And then I have an adapter in the T-bar so that the bars going across the front where I'm holding the actual warp threads is also a 1-inch pipe. I will be talking at the end of the video about modifications that I want to make to this loom for the future and future projects that I want to do on this, which of course will be years down the line, but I will talk about those at the end. So that was the basis of this new loom that I put together. I had this all drawn up last Sunday. I went to Home Depot the same night. As soon as I finished this, I brought this with me into Home Depot, bought all of the pipe. I paid, I believe, just under $110 for all of the pieces. And then I got home and I cut all of the pipe and stuck it all together. And I had this built within probably 30 minutes. It was very, very quick and simple. The adjustments that I made are, instead of 8 feet tall, this is now 6 feet tall. And instead of 6 feet wide, it is now 5 feet wide. but I did keep that 1 foot in depth here. Once it was set up, I let it sit for Sunday night. I was just excited by the fact that I had built it, so I had to take the rest of the night off and just admire the fact that I did that on my own. But then it got to warping. So I have several cones of yarn in my house that I bought from a warehouse, and I haven't touched them. I had originally intended to use it for knitting, but it came in great handy for this. So this is 100% cotton yarn. It is a 2-ply. I don't know, it's meant for machine knitting, so I should have more details about it, but I unfortunately don't. So I don't know the actual size of this yarn, but it is, I mean, I would consider it a fingering weight if we were comparing to knitting. It is pretty thin. So I used this. I went, because my pattern is 496 knots across, and I needed some for the borders, I wrapped around the loom up and down 500 times. And of course, as I was doing that, one of the first issues that I ran into was I started like here on the loom, and I got to about here, and then I shifted all of the threads all the way over and then kept going. And because of that, and because this is built out of PVC, it isn't as strong as wood, the top and the bottom bars began to warp. So by the time I had finished the 500 wraps, my wraps started here and they ended about here, and I wanted them to be more centered. So I shifted that entire dense bit of thread to the middle where it collapsed, because the bars had warped so much that the tension was completely garbage at that point. I essentially spent the rest of the day and part of the next day rewrapping the loom and fixing it because of those tension issues that I came across. It was too tight on one side, way too loose in the middle, and then it was again too tight on the other side. So I spent a good amount of time fixing tension issues while I was warping this loom. That was one of the first major issues that I came across, but I did fix it. It did not end up spanning the entire loom like it does now. It still had probably like, I don't know, 6 inches to a foot on either side of space. So it was mostly condensed in the middle. And then what you want to do when you start actually working on the rug is you do a starting chain. And I will put a quick clip in here, or I will put links to other videos that show the starting chain, because mine is already done. But I essentially went through, you could do this with a crochet hook. I just did it with my own hands. And you're essentially creating a chain stitch by hand around 2 threads at a time, all the way across. And that helps to space out the threads properly and also like hold them where they should be in alignment, like the way that you warped it. So that did take about a whole day for me. Doing everything by hand and doing it the hard way. Everything took about an entire day to set up the loom. So I had the starting chain done. I had this warped. I did not have this wooden bar in here. I had not separated the threads like this so that you could pass yarn through the shed in different ways. So then I took one of my additional lengths of 1-inch pipe, hung it on the outside with this 1/2-inch pipe attached as well. And then you also want to add something else in the mix. The videos that I watched used a single metal wire, which was not very flexible. It was a sturdy metal wire, but not very thick. So my original idea was an old cable that I had in my house, and I will talk about why it's like this now. So I took an old HDMI cable. I had this, I had a 1-inch pipe, and I had a 1/2-inch pipe. And you start from one end and you wrap the back thread around all three of these, and then you make another loop just around the cord, and that again helps to separate. There's a back thread and then there's a space with one loop here, and then you tie the next back thread and then there's a space. And so the problem that I ended up having after I had warped the entire dowel, you're supposed to remove the extra pipe. So I took out the 1/2-inch pipe, and that created a lot of give. So that way, when you slide the board down the back, it will still open it one way. And then if you pull the dowel, it pulls the threads forward. And then you can open the shed the other way. The problem that I had was this wire is coated in, I assume, plastic or rubber or something like that. This has absolutely no slide whatsoever. I cannot shift this yarn on this cable at all. So by the time I had finished the entire bar, it was holding all of the stitches in place like this, or it was holding all of the threads in place. I could not move it whatsoever to actually appropriately spread them out. So that took me an entire day, and in the end I said I have to just cut it off the loom. So I did. So now I have a permanently cotton feathered HDMI cable. I do still have the extra pipe that I could use as the dowel if I wanted to reattempt it. But instead, what I ended up doing is I took my knitting cables that I had laying around that were not in use in any of my other projects, and I just threaded the cable through the strings that the dowel would have pulled forward. So this does make it a little bit easier for me, because now I bought those little kits from Michaels for weaving, and it comes with these three. So it comes with a little wooden shuttle, it comes with a comb, and it comes with this needle. And this needle actually ended up being like one of my most useful tools. It is flat this way, and it's really, really simple to come right underneath this cable and slide this in and pick up those threads. So this is like one of my most used tools, alongside a very small crochet hook. This is a size USC or 2.75 millimeters, which is actually what I started the tapestry on. I just figured I could use it over here instead. So I decided that the dowel is optional for me, which means I spend a lot more time manually pulling threads forward after each row of knots to throw the weft thread across. And I do 2 passes. So one of them I can easily pick up here. And then when I have to go through and do the opposite threads on the second pass, I have to use the crochet hook to pull them from the back. And that takes a lot longer. So on the first pass, I can do it in probably 3 to 5 minutes. And on the second pass, it takes me probably 15 to 20. So it just has a gauge. So long story short, I decided to negate that pole, and instead I grabbed this piece of wood, which is an old piece of baseboard that the previous owner left in the basement before I bought this house. So this was just laying around, so I decided to use this. And then of course the knitting cables, as I've already said, are going across here. This tension actually holds this bar in place. This could shift up or down, but because this cable is here holding the threads crossed, it is what's holding this bar in this place. The next thing that I noticed is my tension was still not good. It was perfect over on this side, and it was perfect over on the other side. And in the middle, it was the most wobbly thing in the world. So I have several just hand weights, free weights, laying around the house. So I had a set of 15-pound ones, and I ended up tying, again with that thick twine that I was using to hold the bottom bar down. I ended up tying a 15-pound weight to the center of the middle one, and that corrected a good deal of the tension issues, and made it so that this was much less loose to work on. It was still too loose. So I ended up adding a second one. I moved the first one over, so now I have two 15-pound weights hanging on this bottom bar. I'm actually shocked that the loom is able to handle that much weight with it being just built out of PVC. I thought this would snap. I mean, the top bar is warped quite a bit, but the bottom one is kind of sitting like even now with 30 pounds of weight on it. But anyways, that's just a little sidebar. So I have 30 pounds of weight hanging on the bottom bar to hold the tension down. And now it's generally fairly even across all of the warp threads. It's still not as tight as you would probably want it. So I do have some issues when I'm tying the knots onto the rug, where if I pull the knot down instead of just sitting where I want it to, it kind of pulls the cotton thread through it in a weird way. So you have to adjust it so the knot actually looks the way you want it to. It also makes it sometimes a little tricky if it's not tension tight enough. When I take my scissors, and I use this instead of a knife, there are certain tools that you use in hand knotting rugs. One is a big metal comb, which has a lot more weight on it than these little these little wooden combs that I'm using to beat everything down. But another tool that they use is essentially a crochet hook with a knife on the bottom, and you hold it back here. So you use this to pull the threads forward, do the knot, and then you cut it with the knife. Instead, I'm making the knots entirely by hand and pulling the threads by hand, and then I just use scissors to cut across the yarn. If the warp threads aren't tight enough, it makes cutting it a little bit more challenging. So that is one thing. I have pretty much decided that this rug is going to be finished no matter how imperfect it is. There are tons of mistakes, the tension just being the first one. Because once you finish the starting chain, there is a few rows of weaving to, again, further set like the warp threads where they should be. I think that's the purpose of it. And it kind of creates like a good stable foundation to start the knots on. And I made so many weaving mistakes immediately upon starting. I was missing threads constantly. It was, I made a lot of mistakes weaving. So I did 8 passes, where just across one way is one pass. So I did back and forth 8 times, and then I started the first row of knots. So other than this cotton yarn that I am using for the warp, and I'm also using it for one of the weft passes, I will show you the other one. This is the other thread that I'm using for the second weft pass. And this is another cotton that I've had laying around. This is, I actually have information here. This is 100% carded cotton. This is an 8-2 in American Red by Spartan Dyers. So this is an even thinner cotton, which I use for the second pass. For the knots, I am using some felted wool that I will not be using for anything else, but I have so much of it. This is the first cone that I have, and this is a fingering weight. And this yarn is so interesting. I thought it was very interesting when I bought it. I had never used felted yarn before, and I think I used it for the prototype of my fingerless mittens pattern. And I was like, oh, this must soften up as you wear it. and then I wouldn't wear it enough to soften it up. So I have no idea if that's even true. So it's been sitting around my house for a long time since then. I knew I was gonna use it for some sort of home decor instead of wearables, because it's a little bit too rustic feeling for me to ever want it next to my skin. So I have this cone of this color. Let me see if I have any more information on it. This is the color Magnolia. It is 1/110 wool, and it is felted yarn. And then I have a second cone with this lovely dark brown color. This one is, let me see if I can find the sticker. This color is Hickory, again 1/110, although they crossed out the 110 and wrote 5. I am not well versed in how to read numbers for coned yarn like this. But anyways, the color is Hickory. So I have these 2 cones, which I am going to make the rug with. I also have another cone of purple upstairs, which is roughly this size, but I'm really hoping I don't have to use that in any way, shape, or form in this rug. I'm hoping that this is enough. I already know it's not. I already know that this isn't enough for this for this rug. But anyways, that's what I'm using for the knots. So I did the starting chain in the cotton, and then the couple of rows that I wove afterwards, I used the wool. I'm not sure if I should have used the wool or if I should have used cotton, but I went with the wool just because. The first 4 rows I did every other string, and then the last 4 rows I did every 2 strings to kind of align, because you need to pull 2 strings forward to make each of the knots on. So I kind of wanted to separate those so it was a little bit easier for me on the first row to see where those 2 strings were aligned. This took me several attempts because, as it turns out, I warped 503 passes around the bar, even though I like quadruple counted every single time. Between every step of this process, I counted 500 warps. And somehow when I got to actually doing the knots, I had 503. So I had to redo the borders. So the borders now have 4 warps on one side and 3 on the other. But on this side over here, I'm counting 2 of those as 1. So I'm double wrapping that on one side, and then there's 3 on the other, because you weave in and out on the border to create a really nice edge, and kind of hold all of the weft threads in there so that they're not like obviously visible too. And it just creates a nice little detail on the edge. So I'm going to start getting some up close pictures and talking about that process. Let me do that. So I started over here on the right. This is my starting thread, which I will weave in after everything's done. And you can see I have the starting chain here, and then I have several rows of weaving underneath. And this creates the foundation for building the knots off of. So we go all the way to the end, and then I started the knots themselves. And you'll see on the knitting cable here, you might have noticed that I have some stitch markers. So this marks 50 stitches, this marks 100 stitches. And of course I counted from that end. So that marks the border stitches, the first 50, the end of the first page of pattern is the red ones, 100 stitches, 150, the end of the second page of the pattern, 200, 250, the end of the third page, and so on. And then there's like this weird, this was 300 stitches, but it was also the end of part 5. There's like a really small section on one of the pages, and then again continuing all the way to the end. So this kind of helps me judge if I'm on the right track with where my knots are positioned. For now, this isn't part of like the words or anything important like the deer pattern in the middle. So I'm not too worried about placing like the brown knots in the wrong spot. So after I did that, I did the first row of the knots, and then you do in between, you'll see there's one row of weft, which is the cotton, and then the second row, which is the red cotton. And you do that in between every single row of knots. And this holds them down in place. You're supposed to beat this pretty vigorously to hold the knots down. After the first row, I trimmed this to about 1 inch before I finally like looked up how deep rug piles are supposed to be. And heavy foot traffic is less than 1/2 inch. Less foot traffic is about 1/2 inch. Shag rugs are about 1 inch. I had originally cut this to 1 inch, and then I decided that was a bit too long, so I went in with this ruler, and I wanted it to be around 1/2 inch, but of course that's on this side, and I am a lefty cutter, so I used this mark right here and cut to the 44 millimeter mark. I figure once this rug is completely finished, I will go in with an electric trimmer and I will trim it down to exactly 1/2 inch. The only other thing that I'm concerned about is this is only 2 rows and this seems very dense to me. I'm not entirely sure if this is the proper density that I should have for the whole entire rug, or if I should go down to just holding each knot single, because currently I am winding up balls of yarn and holding it double as a center and outer pull from the same ball. So this is currently how I'm holding it, and I'm not sure if I want to go down to using just a single strand. I might practice on the next row here with just a single strand and see how I like that. Otherwise, I will keep going double-stranded, and I am sure that I will run out of yarn before this is done. The other part of this, after you've finished a row of knots and you've done the weft threads, that I haven't actually done yet, is I will pass the weft threads to the back, and I have those on 2 different shuttles here, and then I will bring a separate ball of wool to the front, and I'm actually going to weave the border. Oops, let me get my comb. I'll just push those back down. Okay, so I'm going to tuck those behind, and I'm going to use this to just go back and forth to wrap the border. So I'll pass it through there. And then because I'm doing 3, I need to pick up this one and pick up this one and come back through this way. Okay, keep that cotton back there. And then I will do one more pass. So for the border, you want to do kind of 2 rows per row of knots. So one of those will be for the row of knots, the other one will be for the row of wefts, and then so on. All right, this is going to be the next row of knots, so I can show you how I've been doing it. I will start from the end here. So you're going to pick up the 2 strings or warp threads. I split them. You pass this through the middle, wrap it around both, and then you're going to tuck it underneath through the middle again. So it's going to look like that. And then I slide it down, and then holding it kind of tight against my finger, I take the scissors and very gently go across. Instead of like heavily going down, which pulls the warp threads a little bit too tight, I try to gently go across. and that seems to cut it very well. So I'll do that again. I'll try to get a little bit closer too so you can see it better. So pass it through the middle, wrap it around to the back. So you're going to look like that. And then pass it underneath in the middle, like that. I'm going to pull this a little bit more so it has less coming through. Okay. And I slide it down, just very gentle. Take my scissors and cut across. And then once I'm finished with the entire row, I will come back and give it a trim. And I really use this as kind of like a base because of the way that this is, and I'm a lefty for scissors. I come through like this, push the bottom blade against the previous rows and trim that way. And there you go. I am saving these little bits in a bag separately so that I can use them to stuff something later. Here it is one more time. I'm going to try to do this without bumping the camera. Pull the strings forward, split them, pass the yarn through, loop it around and through the back middle, like that. And these are not sharp scissors in any way, shape, or form, so they work pretty well for what I need them to do. So I want to talk about how long this project is going to take me. I did a quick little estimate the other day. When I started the first row, I did about 76 knots in 30 minutes. And because it's 496 across, I estimated that if I got a little bit faster, each row would take me about 3 hours. If I do 2 rows a day, it'll take me approximately 6 hours a day for the next 2¼ to 2⅓ years. I already know I'm not going to get it done that fast. That is so much time to put into this every single day. I will not be able to accomplish that. It will take roughly 2,500 hours, and I anticipate it will be spread across the course of 3 to 5 years. That is my best estimate so far. It is also because I wasn't taking into account the additional time it would take me to do the 2 weft passes. I think it will take me closer to 3½ hours to do each row, regardless of how practiced I am at doing this and how quickly it goes. So yeah, I think 3 to 5 years is a good estimate for this, being like a 4½ foot by, or closer to 5 feet, honestly. But we'll say 4½ feet to roughly 7½ to 8 feet tall. I think that's a pretty good estimate. The other thing that I want to talk about is modifications that I want to make for the future. The biggest one being the bars that I'm using to actually warp the loom. I want to replace them with 1-inch wooden dowels, which I think will be a little bit sturdier and won't warp nearly as much when I'm actually starting a project. The second thing I'm going to have to figure out is, as I'm doing this rug, I don't have a good way of modifying my height on the ground or the height of the rug itself to be able to continue working at the same level. Meaning the more I get done, the higher up I'm going to have to do the knots, or I'm going to have to figure out how to turn this into a scroll bottom so that I'll be able to move my progress further down so that I can appropriately work on it. The other thing, the glaring hole in this loom and this project that you might have noticed is I said it will be probably 7 to 8 feet tall. This loom is not even 6 feet tall. So it is not tall enough for this project. I'm going to have to, at some point, figure out, and I think I have an idea of how I'm going to do it. I have to figure out how to reconfigure the loom and at the same time rewarp the next section on top of this. I'm gonna have to figure that out. I think what I'm going to end up doing is getting a good amount of this done, and I'll probably figure out how to scroll the bottom and adjust the height of the top bar first. And then once I get to a point where I'm like nearly running out of warp thread to work on, I think what I'm going to do is warp through each of the threads onto a new bar above it, and then remove the one that it's currently on, and then fix the whatever tension issues I'm sure will occur. And at that point, I think I will reconfigure that top bar to be wooden, because I will not be taking apart this loom in any way, shape, or form while I am working on it like this, at least not without a significant amount of progress that I feel confident I can recover all of the warp threads appropriately if I were to remove it from the loom. So all of these modifications will be coming much later, probably years down the line, but I'm already thinking about them because I know that I will face those issues eventually. But I am really, really excited by this. I'm excited to have a project that will be a certain heirloom that I have made with my own two hands that can be passed down into other people in my family. I will not be having kids myself, but I do have a niece and nephew. I have, my brothers and sisters, and they're growing families. So anyone in my family who shows an appreciation of this will get it when I die. That won't be for a long time. So I'm so fascinated by these ancient textile arts. I'm just so grateful that I have managed to get this far. It's taken me this long to get across 2 rows because I have to step back at certain points and just be like, I can't believe my own 2 hands made it even this far teaching myself. I want to be able to share that joy with other people and see if other people who have been interested in this craft and maybe didn't have like the instructions that I wish I had to get started. There are affordable ways to do this. You don't have to blow your budget. I think altogether, if I was including all of the yarn that I purchased years ago, all of the materials, I would say I probably spent $200 to $250, and I will get a full rug out of it. And like these hand knotted rugs, from what I've researched, take a team of women like a year to make. And they sell for tens of thousands of dollars. But I have no intention of selling this. This is a piece made for me and made for my enjoyment of the process. But just to give you an idea of how intensive this craft is and how like timeless, I love it so much. So I hope that you have enjoyed walking through all of this with me, letting me talk about my trials and errors when I have been doing this. And I'm going to try to keep weekly updates posted on my Instagram, or I might start doing shorts here on YouTube as well, just to give just a little brief, 2-minute update on the progress that I've had from that week. I think that would be a really great way to see how it grows throughout the years. So thank you so much for sitting with me through all of this rambling. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And let me know if you are considering picking up this craft. You can, of course, do it on a much smaller scale. This is a huge scale to be learning on. I admit this is way bigger than I probably should have started. But I'm just happy to be here. So Let me know what you think in the comments. If I have made any errors in my explanation of things, please correct me in the comments. I want to be able to explain this appropriately with the right terminology, with the right explanations. I want to be able to talk about this properly. So if you want to correct me, please do. Okay, that's enough for me for today. Thank you so much again, and I will see you in the next one.